Thank you for tuning in to Not Just for Laughs on Radio Free Brooklyn. We are here joined in the studio with Max Hollinger. Max Hollinger, you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody.
And the stand-up comedian and improviser and comedian galore, Mitchell Heffington.
Hello.
And
You said that would be my intro.
oh man, well, you know what? A man can't have everything in life. I was thrown by the pre-record, but I think we're going to overcome it and move on. So for all of you who are tuning in for the first time, this is our first show, and we're really proud to be here.
Woohoo!
Yes, and thankful for the whole community. And we're just going to jump right into talking about comedy and talking about what makes comedy so great. So, Mitchell, do you have anything? I'm throwing this at you, but do you have anything from the week or the past month that, I don't know, or today even, that was just like, that was a little weird, or just something that happened that is on your mind?
Yeah, so this struck me as weird, but actually coming out of the subway station on the way here, I saw a homeless man eating some pizza, and I saw him finish the pizza and then just throw away the pizza crust, and something about that struck me as incredibly bizarre.
That's literal beggars can't be choosers. That's insane. That happened to me recently. I was on a subway and I was eating a sandwich and I had half of it left and I hadn't touched it, and this woman came on and gave this really impassioned plea, and I was like, all right, I'm not that hungry. I was gonna just save it, but I'll give it to her. And I handed it to her, and this guy was like, don't give it to her. She's gonna throw it on the floor. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, I'm telling you, she does this all the time. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, it doesn't happen. And then she walked out and literally just threw it on the floor and walked away.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
Listen, it's New York. These aren't just any homeless people. These are New Yorker homeless people. So
and like that, we
have
start
standards.
we start our show with some homeless talk.
Hashtag homeless talk at Radio Free.
Mitchell, why don't you? I'm cutting to this a little fast, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you, but for our listeners at home who don't know you, who don't know what you do, what's your dating elevator pitch?
Oh boy. So a little bit about me. I am originally from Texas.
Ooh.
And I have degrees in finance and entrepreneurship. And
those are both very marketable.
Very marketable and very unfunny. And I, after graduating, worked in the finance industry for a year and a half, still in Texas. And long story short, decided that...
Well, we have time for long story long, but also you can cut to long story short if you want.
For the sake of the elevator pitch, I'll make it brief. If we want to expound, we certainly can. But
Deal.
Long story short, I did not like finance, so I started doing some open mics in Austin, where I was living at the time, and I was by no means good, but I really enjoyed doing open mic nights, and I just kind of caught the bug and ultimately moved up here to New York and started doing both stand-up and improv.
Interesting.
Okay.
Do you find that in Texas open mics had more of people on the street came into the open mics? Because in New York, I think it has more of a stereotype of just being comedians talking to comedians.
There certainly was a wider range of people, I think, that came into mics in Texas, not necessarily off the street, but whereas any given mic here in New York is like 70 to 80% men ages 22 to 28. There you would see parents, you would see even older than that. I don't know. It was just a very different crowd. And I think more interesting than the people who came in to perform were the people who actually attended. So the mics in Austin, at least there were a few, you could get a full crowd of paying attendees.
And you still weren't paid, I'm going to guess.
Correct.
Okay.
But this was like
works
an open
out.
mic. You didn't have to. I'm saying you didn't have to get booked. Like this was you were able.
These were open mics that you would just show up day of, or you would email about a few weeks in advance, and you would be put on the show. But not only were you not booked, you didn't have to pay to perform on these mics, but you could still draw a paying crowd, which is which is unheard of. That's too good to be true.
Does that mean that your network was like a little smaller? Like, I mean, did you ever get to perform like somewhere that you were paid to perform at?
No,
Okay.
no, I didn't do that. But
Interesting.
I also didn't perform for long in Austin. So
What's
was
not
only-
for long?
You outgrew Austin fast.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I just moved away from
That's a worse-
Austin pretty quickly, so I never really had time to get any traction.
Okay. Well, an important question. When you moved to New York, how many of your cowboy questions did you have to get, or cowboy jokes did you have to drop when you moved to New York?
You
Different
know,
audience.
as you may be able to tell from looking at me, I'm not a stereotypical Texan. I don't have cowboy looks, nor do I have cowboy material.
For the listeners at home, he's wearing skinny jeans and a sweatshirt.
A sweatshirt with a denim jacket.
No
With-
cowboy hat.
With
yeah,
the
but
denim
important
jacket.
here.
he's looking pretty fly. I'll just put that out there.
Well, thank you.
Looking pretty fly.
I wasn't
so.
searching for a compliment. But no, I didn't have any material that I had to change. Although I recently did an improv scene, actually with Ellie,
Woo!
where
We do improv.
and I'm going to take the risk here of trying to retell an improv scene because that's seldom funny.
Was it when we were in together?
But it was when we were in together.
God.
And the suggestion was stickers.
Okay.
Which-
okay.
This one's
Which
good.
most people think of
At least-
as little sticky
at least setting
pieces
this up
of
for a good
art.
thing.
Yeah.
And in Texas, a sticker to me, we have normal stickers, okay, yes, but a sticker to me is this tiny little thorn ball, for lack of a better description.
You used the
that
word
just-
burr, which really helped.
Yes,
Oh.
it's similar
visualize
to a
it.
burr.
Like the
It-
things that get stuck on your shoes and like your socks on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So
so
like, are
we
they
have
like they're
those-
like light brown and crunchy and like but like get stuck in your skin type of
less
thing?
crunchy, more sharp. So
Ooh.
it's like a burr, but with thorns. And it is
Yeah. Yeah.
it is
we've
the
had
bane
those.
of a Texan's existence. And so I tried to do a scene
Oh, it
about
was
that
great.
with a bunch of Northeasterners, and it didn't work.
It was
Wait,
also-
No one
Did
knew
it
what
actually just
was.
not translate? Like you thought it was that kind of sticker?
Yeah.
And you thought it was.
What he did is he
a regular
said
sticker?
you brought a blanket. Mitchell's really good at improv, and I feel I don't know, for some reason I feel like you're not allowed. People are like, you can't be good at both, but I think he is. And like he comes out with like a really good initiation. Is like, all right, you brought the blanket for the stickers. So I'm like, all right, I know what the scene is. We're having a picnic, and I'm showing him my sticker collection. Like I'm this nerdy person, and he. And I'm like, all
What kind of
right,
picnics do you
here
go
are the
to?
stickers. And he just looks at me, and I look at him. And there was this moment where like, we're not communicating.
No, we had two different stickers. I brought a blanket so he wouldn't have to sit on stickers. He thought I was trying not to sit on stickers,
Yeah.
and it became a confusing
It
scene.
was. It
But other than
Okay. All right.
ended up working out because comedy, but
that,
comedy of errors. I actually that story just came up because someone used the term salt lick.
oh yeah, that's a barbecue restaurant in Austin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it may
I mean,
be a
it's-
term as well.
It's
Right,
also, it's also yeah, it's a thing. It's a noun.
But they grew up in Atlanta, so I was like, maybe that's. I said is like I just had a run in with someone where we both used the same word, meant different things. Can you define what you mean by that? Because I don't want this to happen again. But I think it just meant something really salty. I don't know.
I don't actually know what salt lick means. I just have eaten their barbecue, and I
Okay.
recommend it.
Was it salty?
Yeah.
Did you have to lick the salt off?
The
Before
salt
you
and the juice, it's a messy experience.
So the
Weed's
lick
a
isn't
man.
really the lick isn't an important part of salt lick. It's
No.
mainly the salt,
No, it's mainly the barbecue.
mainly the barbecue. They should
Yeah.
have that in the name.
Listen, we don't have to get so is the word didactic about this.
Yeah,
you
it
know.
is.
Also, I'm not a foodie, but I like how like certain places are like defined by restaurants. Like the fact that you're like, oh yeah, that's an Austin restaurant. Like,
Yeah.
that's interesting to me because to me, I don't know. I've never gone somewhere to just eat at a restaurant. Are you a little bit of a foodie?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't
well,
know.
okay, to an extent, in that I enjoy a good meal. I don't think I'm more of a foodie than anyone else.
You like food.
It's like,
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
care about food. I eat steamed broccoli from the bag every night for dinner.
I'm not that far to one end of the spectrum, but I'm also not
Right.
a foodie per se. My foodie manifests itself in not eating at a restaurant with any less than like 4 stars on
That's-
Google.
Ooh.
Is that?
No,
Okay.
I think that's pretty normal.
Okay.
I think that's normal.
But sometimes you have to check out because there's outliers. Like, there's some restaurants that just have a 3-star because they only have like one review. And
Right.
the review is like, my cat died and I'm sad. Or like, it's always about like, it'll be like Postmates problem. It'll be like, well, the Postmate person was rude to me.
Right.
And you're like, well, that has, Postmates is a separate company, right?
I don't know. It could always go either way with reviews. I worked at a restaurant once. The main issue that I find with reviews is I have a hard time trtrusting whoever's taking the time to write reviews. Like, I personally have better things to do with my day.
Group of people.
Yeah. Like, I once worked at a restaurant. We got 1 star by a guy. He wrote an essay. Like, he was going for a thesis on like every issue with the plate. And like it was like we had served it on plastic, and he's like, the type of plastic was bad, and I didn't like it for this reason. He had categories for things that he liked and didn't like, and I don't know if I can trust anybody who's like, what kind of person are you if you can actually put away like 20 to 30 minutes on a review for a restaurant you probably just kind of pass through? I don't understand.
Important life events happen in my life, and I forget to tell my family because I'm so busy. I don't know, he has time or she has time to post an essay about a burger shop.
Yeah. It's a bit concerning. But also, just back on the topic of defining you as a foodie, important, I think, barometer for foodie. Do you have an Instagram?
I do have an Instagram.
Do you take pictures of your food?
I do not. I don't even take pictures of myself.
You want to plug yourself?
Plugging myself, I feel like would be a futile exercise because I don't post.
Oh, okay.
I have it just because I feel like I need to have it to give myself
social pressure.
Yeah, a little better chance. I guess I can post sets on there if I have them on tape, but no need to plug.
Yeah, also, I don't know. Also, the idea, because this is a question I wanted to ask you about. And I guess we'll jump into this now, is what I'm curious what your thoughts are on, because we discussed, we didn't actually, I was going to bring this up, but social media and online forms of comedy when it comes to stand-up, especially because you do improv and stand-up, unless you do more forms that I'm not aware of. And both of those are in person on stage.
Yes.
And I'm curious, this can be a broader question of what are your thoughts on, let's say, memes. And some people love it. Some people, that's their bread and butter. Some people chuckle at it, but don't appreciate it. And then that ties into the whole social media promotion. There's some people who just like hustle on their social media, and like they're literally open mic comedians who you rarely see at actually performing, but like their social media is like, they're able to hype themselves up so well. So what are your thoughts on that?
On the subject of memes specifically, as much as I want to dismiss them, I still laugh at them, and generally that's because I'm caught unawares. So much of comedy is surprising someone. So, you're scrolling through one of the various social media platforms and, out of the abyss pops this funny meme. And I can buy it. I think that's funny, but that's not me. That's not what I'm good at. So I don't post things on social media for the most part. I do think it's helpful, though. I see a lot of other comedians posting premises, or I will see jokes posted that eventually turn into something more. Like, for instance, Julio Torres, who is a stand-up comedian himself. He also helps on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and he's a writer at SNL.
He was supposed to be our guest tonight, but we bumped him for you. So
wow.
Yeah.
I am honored. Yeah. And I think you made a mistake.
He begged. He was like, please, I need this.
He's texting you right now.
Yeah, he's probably having a tough time.
Yeah,
anyway, I follow him on Twitter, and he had a famous sketch on SNL with Ryan Gosling called Papyrus. And yeah. Fantastic.
He's the one who wrote. He also wrote Wells for Kids.
Yes, he wrote that. He wrote The Sink. He wrote a lot of these interesting and unique sketches that have worked really well on SNL recently. Anyway, he wrote Papyrus, which was that, for those who don't know, that sketch that Ryan Gosling was in when he hosted, I think, last year. And the whole sketch was predicated upon Ryan Gosling realizing that the movie Avatar just used the font Papyrus for the film and got away with it. No one questioned them. And so the sketch unfolds, and, the further it goes, Ryan Gosling gets more and more frustrated. But I follow Julio Torres on Twitter, and he had previously, before he wrote that sketch, tweeted out that idea. And he just said, I can't believe that James Cameron chose Papyrus for the font and got away with it. And ultimately, I guess he used Twitter as a way to kind of test the waters to see if that idea had any traction with his followers. And then Once he got some solid feedback on that, he wrote it into a sketch.
Did you see the feedback, like the retweets or anything, or do you remember that? Or...
I don't remember the numbers, but I remember it being one of his more trafficked tweets.
Interesting.
That's wild. Imagine, and that's so cool because you get to see the life of the joke.
Yes.
Twitter basically becomes his open mic. I'm assuming he's a busy guy if he's working at SNL, so he doesn't have time necessarily. So he tweets this out. People like it, and then he goes into the pitch meeting the next week, and they're like, "Hey, what idea do you have?" And he just throws out, "I had this realization last week," and then we're talking about it a year later, and it's seen as like one of the better SNL sketches of the last few years.
Right. So in that regard, I do think that social media, or specifically Twitter, is a great platform to try out kind of your minimum viable punchline, to use some of my old business background and lingo, but to test out the shortest version of a joke, and then you can build around it if it works.
Interesting. So you cut it down,
the
smallest it can be, which is what stand-up actually is,
ultimately,
and then you just build it up again.
Well, there's a bit of I wouldn't call it a debate about that, but there are different ways of looking at that. I think specifically that's Dimitri Martin's style, that he talks a lot in different podcasts and interviews that he's had, that his favorite type of joke is like the shortest possible, like, set-up punchline. But if you watch people like, I don't know, what's the guy's name? Massive guy, just released a couple Netflix specials. What's his
Is he
name?
balding?
Yeah, bald. No, he's bald. What's his name?
Tom Segura?
No.
Burt Kreischer. These are all the ones all the older comedians make fun of. They're like, who's this Burt Kreischer guy?
I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Bald African American.
Dave Chappelle?
Dave Chappelle, yeah. So, okay, well, that's on me.
No, I blank on names all the time.
Okay.
All the time. I had to teach myself to remember the name Richard Pryor because I knew people would be like, you don't know who that is? So I had to like memorize.
That's an important one, I guess. Yeah.
Very important.
I guess. But he, a lot of his stand-ups, I mean, it's different since he's so he's just like so funny as a person. His style isn't really like punchline. He's just funny throughout. Yeah. There were a couple of his stand-ups where it was really a long story that he was just like drawing you in, and the punchline was like after like 10 minutes.
No, 100%. I was just my girlfriend, actually, we were just talking about this yesterday, about how a comedian who has a base is able to go bluer and able to go edgier because they have the benefit of the doubt that we know they're a good person. Whereas at an open mic, if someone gets up and they say something at the edge, you're like, well, I don't know. Is this guy, like, I don't know what this guy actually believes. I don't know if this person's joking around or not.
Right.
So someone like Dave Chappelle, that extends to, he can talk for a few minutes, or now it's my turn to blank. Norm Macdonald can go for a few minutes because we know there's going to be a punchline at the end. Like, we're like, okay, we're going to wait because there's going to be a laugh at the end because they have years of material behind them. But whereas if I get up and I'm talking, they're like, maybe this guy thought this was a poetry mic, you know?
Well, and also,
does he know where he is?
He looks vaguely confused, and my friends are like, no, he's always like that.
Oh gosh, I'm torn. I have two stories.
I'm one of the friends who does that.
I'll choose this story. I'll choose this one. Just talking about people doing the wrong form of comedy at an open mic night. I went to a mic at a bar here in town, and it's a more eccentric mic, not the most traditional stand-up comedy. A lot of attempts at making something unique and fresh. Anyway, as a prime example, that
was a very kind way to put it.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's different. It's not my sense of humor, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. So anyway, I went to this mic, and my jokes are a little more buttoned up, a little more wordy, and the performer that the story is about got up, and she's a woman, and she got up on stage and she undressed down into the nude, and there was a piano on stage in the corner, and she walked over to the piano and she proceeded to play the piano with her face. And just smashed her forehead against the keys of the piano, and the people in the audience were applauding, and they're like, good for you, this is you being you, and that's fine. But she crushed, and that's one of those moments where I am just like questioning everything I've ever known about comedy and myself, and I'm like, if that's what it takes to be funny in this city,
oh my god,
I don't have a chance.
There are a few times in life they're very strange times when you have to ask yourself, should I be naked right now?
And
Would that be better?
It's much harder when you see it work.
The problem
too.
is every struggling actor has asked themselves that question, like, maybe I can strip and make money. And now it's like, you can do both.
I have never been tempted to do that. My physique is not going to sell me. I know it's going to have to be something else.
Well, it can be your jokes, hopefully.
Ideally.
I think the reason I laughed extra hard is I think I just saw that same comedian 3 weeks ago.
That was a different video online, Ellie.
But we need a little sound effect for that, but we don't have it yet.
But
I was talking to a friend, a comedian friend of mine, and I was like, I just went to this show, and this girl just got up and stripped naked, and just said, "Guys, draw me."
What?
And just stood there. And he starts laughing. He's like, was this and this her name? I'm like, yeah. He goes, she's my best friend.
Wow.
He's like, I agree it was, out there, but like, and I was like, I'm glad I didn't say anything bad. Like, I just like told you the story, but it's just a small world. And now you're bringing it up. I guess she's getting around. Like,
well, I'm not surprised that an act like that is talked about, but it's crazy that it's this connected within the comedy world.
It's so weird. And it's an improv connection, and this is a sketch friend, and like it just all interconnects. But
nudity transcends.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw a homeless woman undressed on the subway this morning. Maybe it's the same person.
And no one laughed.
Wasn't funny.
It was not funny. But that's what's so I think that you touched on something which made me think, which is, so I have a survival job as well. And at first I was really resistant to it, but I think that it's teaching me a lot about comedy, and since it's marketing. And one of the things is I work with a real estate team, and we were discussing their branding and how they have to be themselves. They can't, if they brand themselves to be like young and millennial, and they're not young and millennial, then they're just going to get calls from a bunch of people that want a young and millennial real estate team, and it's going to fail.
Yeah.
But if they lean into who they are, even if it's not cool, they're going to get more the right clients. So like and it's so hard to say that, because you're like, I want laughs.
Right.
I don't know we're all, but like we want laughs. We want a connection with the audience. And we're like, but the audience wants this. Right. And you kind of want to be like, well, then you have to remember, like, but that's not you. Like, you're good at something. And maybe like that comedian, IENNE, saw you and was like, wow, I wish like I was able to memorize my joke and write it out so well and perform it so like tightly.
I know she didn't think it about that show, because I bombed. Not a single not even a look of recognition.
Oh my God.
People just stared blankly at me for 5 minutes, and I went home, and it was one of the sadder nights in comedy. But you're right. You have to be yourself on stage. And this is a little aside, but I, again, long story short, met Bill Engvall one of my first months here in New York. And it was a mutual acquaintance that set up this meeting with him. So I
had a sit-down meeting with him.
I had a sit-down meeting before Bill Engvall's show in Westbury, New York.
That's crazy.
And I do not recommend commuting out to Westbury.
Okay.
Not fun.
Metro North?
I don't even remember, to be honest. I think it was probably the Long Island Railroad, but there were so many changes in between that... Anyway, that's a story for another day. But anyway, I met Bill Engvall before the show, and he is a wonderful person. Very funny, but also just the nicest guy. And he gave me this piece of advice. He said, I'm going to tell you what Jay Leno told me, which is a crazy...
That's insane.
Which is a crazy lead into a nugget of advice. I'm now 1 degree of separation from Jay Leno's advice. But he said, Jay Leno told me when I first started that the audience can tell when you're lying, or they can tell when you're talking about something that you don't know. And the takeaway of that advice, at least for me, was, be yourself. Right. And honestly, it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. I think so much of the early stages of at least my career in comedy have been trying to figure out what my voice is. Yeah. There are some jokes that when I'm writing them, I think this is close, but I still don't feel like I have a joke yet that my friends or those who know me well would point to and say, oh, that's so you. That's such a Mitchell joke.
Interesting.
I haven't formed that yet. I haven't formed my persona or my voice on stage. Whereas you hear, you know, a John Mulaney joke today where it's a little whiny and he uses funny turns of phrases and ultimately he surprises you with word choice and with where he takes a story. And you go, oh, that's such a him joke.
Yeah. Or Bill Burr ranting, and you're like, we all thought that, but that's such a Bill Burr take.
Right, exactly. And it's only something that works if it's coming from that person. And I'm not there yet.
Right. That's really hard, though. I was just watching, there's a show on Amazon Prime called, it just came out, I think a few weeks ago, called Inside Jokes. And it tracks 5 or 6 comedians trying to get into the Just for Laughs festival in Montreal. And the episode I'm on now, because I haven't finished it yet, is disgusting voice. And they're saying how like usually takes comedians like up to 5 years to figure that out, because in the beginning you're working on jokes and then at a certain point you get your voice, but like I don't that's such a foreign idea to me. Like I don't know who I am in real life. Like how am I gonna know who I am on stage? It's like it requires really deep, like that vulnerability. Like we discussed this a little bit about like really being vulnerable on stage and being like, hey guys, like, especially because for some of us, we go on stage because we want affirmations.
Yeah.
And then you get on stage and you're like, oh, all those things I use comedy to cover up, I'm now going to bear it all to you.
Yeah. It's interesting getting up on stage for affirmation. I never would have said that I needed affirmation until I started doing comedy. It's weird. I wasn't aware of it until I started doing it and realized that, you know, not necessarily in my day-to-day life, but certainly with comedy, I need people to think I'm funny. There's so much of my self-worth wrapped up in getting laughs.
Yeah.
And that's certainly part of the motivation getting on stage. But it is weird how you have to be self-aware to tell a good joke. You mentioned, Ellie, not knowing yourself off stage. So how could you possibly know yourself on stage? And that's a real struggle, you know? You have to, I don't think you necessarily have to have yourself completely figured out, but you have to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's what my therapist just told me. She was like, she gives me great comedy advice. And she was like, she's like, I once dated a comedian, so I know comedians. But she's like, maybe your voice is, you don't know who you are. Yeah. Or like, whatever that is. I thought that was an interesting perspective, but like just embracing it, like stop, you know.
And, you know, I think that's probably the most relatable point of view. I think very few people are certain of who they are. And so maybe we should, as, you know, comedians, the three of us, but then also as the greater comedy community, should be a little more honest about that and try to write jokes from a position of uncertainty and not necessarily try to decide who we are and then tell from that perspective.
So in order to get there, you think it's like a trial and error thing? Like, say you're talking to somebody and just like, you need to try to be honest with yourself. How does one do that? Like,
especially because, just to build on your question, especially because, and I feel like we could all talk about this together, but when you come up with a good joke, it's really hard to be like, oh, but this isn't my voice.
Yeah.
Because you're like, but it's going to get a laugh. I know, like I just wrote a joke. I'm like, I know we'll get a laugh, but like, it's not me.
Yeah, that has happened. So to your question first, Max, how do you figure that out? Yeah, trial and error. Ultimately, every question that I have about stand-up is answered with reps. Like, how do I know if a joke works? Reps. How do you know if it's in your voice? Reps. You just have to try them. And that's often the unfortunate reality of stand-up comedy, is that you have to fail before you can succeed.
Yeah. I have a joke that I do at a lot of mics, just on that, where I'm just like, hey, like I'm sort of new to comedy, but I have been listening to a lot of podcasts and I've been doing a lot of research into comedy to try to get ready for this. And a lot of the major comedians say you got to fail a lot before you can get good. And so if you don't like it, I'm just trying to be professional up here. So I'm sorry if you paid to come. And that usually does okay. Yeah. Although it happens to be you and I.
I love that one. I've seen you do it twice.
No, it does well. Times. Only we were in a room. Like sometimes it's just a bad room. It's just like, I thought
it was a weird.
Yeah, it was just a bad. It was a Tuesday night and it was just a bad room, and it was just a bunch of comedians that just didn't care to laugh at each other's jokes.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where, and whatever. I don't want to judge anyone, but like the whole comedian does their set and just walks out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of that.
it was
There's a
like
lot of
10
that.
people and 3 or 4 of them just walked out, and it was just like, come on.
I try to keep a pretty strict policy of not blaming a room, which I'm not implying that you're doing, but we can also be honest and say some rooms are better for laughs than others. And those rooms where there are 10 people and all 10 of them are comedians and every single one is going to walk out after their set, I think you can be honest and say, this room wasn't prime for good feedback.
Yeah.
You know John Mulaney's quote about like what open mics in New York are like? Do you know this?
I haven't
He's
heard
like
that.
he's just like, open mics in New York are really hard because it's 10 people and 9 of them are comedians and the 10th guy is just a pile of coats. It's pretty accurate, actually.
It is very accurate.
Yeah. That was actually really, I don't know, maybe you, despite the challenges of that, I personally found it very comforting. Also a little bit that like, we're all comedians. Like when I go to an open mic and I'm a little nervous about how I'm going to perform, I think about how we're all just trying to like sort of perform.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's kind of comforting.
The thing that's most helpful for me, if I'm nervous or if I just get in my head about the set that I'm about to do, is just to quite literally zoom out and just try to picture the whole of New York City living their lives completely unaware of what you're doing. It just, in a way, you got to be careful with that, because if you get too far out, you start to feel really small. But,
but like
Sir,
breakdown on stage, nothing matters.
Yeah, you don't want to get nihilistic about things. But if you zoom out just far enough, you can see enough of the city to realize that what you're doing isn't going to make or break you.
I feel like that helps though with everything.
Yeah.
Like I'll be in a moment, I'll be like getting really mad about something or taking something for granted. And I just zoom out like one notch. And I'm like, what would I say if I was walking past?
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, there's some dude just like getting up to do comedy. Cool. Like that's all it is. It's just you're getting up and talking and everyone's going to forget it. And like maybe they'll remember 1 or 2 jokes, maybe, but like just do your thing.
I was speaking with this person on a flight recently. She talked me up, and generally I don't like to talk on flights, but this turned out to be a really good conversation. She was a psychologist from California, and she had been in New York for some conference, and she asked me what I did, and I told her about comedy, and I was telling her kind of about the open mic scene and how, you're so worried about it, but ultimately, like, no one's going to remember what you say. It's not a big deal. And she said, oh, that's really interesting. We just talked about memory at this conference, and they told us that 93% of the things people remember about us when we're talking to them is nonverbal. And that floored me. And it also made me feel really, really bad isn't the right word, but it was just a weird feeling, because our entire, at least as stand-up comedians, our entire career is words.
Yeah.
And so it's really weird to think that 93% of the work I do is forgotten, and in place of my words is my physical gestures or my general vibe or persona. I need to fact check that. I need to stop throwing around that number without looking it up for myself, because it's staggeringly large.
It could, it could be that it was in one application, and every comedian is different. Like I think about Jim Gaffigan. From my experience, he just stands there on stage with his mic awkwardly to his chin.
Yeah.
And as if he's like shaving and just talks. Whereas like or like Mitch Hedberg, is the same way.
Yeah.
Then you have like Brian Regan, his face is half the joke. Like I remember listening to jokes growing up when I didn't have any video of him. It was just like the audio.
Right.
And there would be moments where I'm like, I don't know what the joke is, because I can't. And the audience is dying, like waves of laughter. I'm like, what's happening?
The aforementioned Richard Pryor is a great example of that. There is more audio of him than video. And so a lot of my exposure to Richard Pryor has been his CDs. And there'll be these moments where there's, an enormous laughter from the crowd, but you didn't see it. So you don't get to play along. But anyway, that is just a little story to paint a picture of how relatively insignificant any given mic is, any given 5-minute set is. And again, I don't want to go too far with that, because I don't
why
want
do anything,
to.
Or
Yeah.
or if
you
no
don't
one
want to get
cares,
to that
why am I
place.
performing? Because obviously it matters, and and you're getting, I mean, there's that side point of like, we focus so hard on getting better. We forget that like, there's real people there. Maybe some, like, I've definitely gone home and told friends about a joke I heard at an open mic.
Oh yeah.
But like, I think we're also focused on like, but is this going to make us better? Are we doing our reps? Are we doing our 10,000 hours? Yeah. That, like, we forget that we're just doing comedy, even if we're not on Just for Laughs or whatever.
Right. I also have a therapist, and I started seeing
therapy.
Therapy is a wonderful thing if you have access to it.
Yeah.
I recommend it. Anyway, so I was going to my therapist specifically for anxiety. I think a lot of it being comedy related, and I lost myself down a rabbit trail of frustrations and kind of disappointments. And she said a very simple thing, which I think kind of mirrors what you just said. And she said, well, I don't know, whenever you start to stress about comedy, just remember that it's what you love. And it's a very simple thing to say, but I think oftentimes I get very upset by comedy, but and by doing so, I forget that I chose to do it, and
interesting
that I love to do it.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost as if sometimes, and Max, you can chime in on this as well, but like sometimes I just get mad at no one. And if I asked myself that, I'd be like, I'm not like, comedy isn't a person. It's like you're doing this, and yes, it's hard, but get over it. Like there's no one holding you back. This is just like, yeah, like the fact of the matter is there's open mics, and the fact of the matters are that there's like festivals you have to apply to, but like it's just comedy. Like get better. Like you love this. You want to be good at it.
Yeah, what a silly thing to get worked up about.
Yeah.
Also, it's important. Like we've been talking a lot about context in a lot of ways. But just like putting even just comedy into perspective, and just sort of like being honest with yourself, and like realizing just how hard it is. You're trying to make complete strangers laugh in 5 minutes. Like I can barely do that with my dad, and so I've known him for quite a while. My dad. It's just like realizing the challenge and the size of the challenge. It's really something that's like comforting. It will help you through like even like tough open mics where nobody really pays attention.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
It's an insane exercise to be given 5 minutes in front of strangers, because you have to introduce yourself. You kind of have to establish who you are and what your voice is. And then within that context, you have to make a joke that aligns with what you just established as who you are and what your perspective is.
So in a way, like to bring an improv analogy, your stand-up, you're doing a who, what, where, but sometimes it's nonverbal. It's by your like how you're standing, how you're talking. You're being like, hey audience, here's the contract between me and you. I'm gonna be like this for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, and honestly, even down to what you wear establishes who you are on stage. I very intentionally choose clothes that I think fit me the best, not just the fit itself, like the size, but fit my persona better. Right. So it would feel unnatural if I got up on stage in pearl snaps and cowboy boots. It just wouldn't work. My voice and my words would betray me very quickly. And it would also look out of place to get up in a 3-piece suit, because I mess around a little bit. I don't take things too seriously.
Unless that's your thing, you know what I mean? Like Melissa McCarthy was saying when she first moved to New York, what she would do, she would just like, she was working in fashion, and she would just get like wigs from a friend or a weird outfit from a friend, and she'd just put it on and improvise at an open mic. Yeah. Like that was just what she would do, because that's like her thing. Yeah. But like, if that's not your thing, like you gotta, would you say you put a lot of thought into your comedic voice, even if you didn't do a lot of comedy in Austin?
Yes. Okay. I think so much about my voice, and I've had a lot of conversations with friends recently, and I appreciate the fact that they indulge me on these things, but I would just ask them, I would say, look, I'm not asking for a compliment here. I'm trying to get an honest answer. What do you think I'm good at? Like, what about what I do makes you laugh? Because I'm really trying to hone my act, and I want to know what my voice is.
I remember you asked me that question about
I did.
Improv.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's an interesting question. But now that you say that, I'm like, oh, that's a really smart question.
As somebody who also, just to chime in, also has a therapist, and also has struggles with anxiety.
Oh, 3 of us?
Another comedian who
we must be
has concerns with these kinds of issues.
Out of the norm. Most people probably never, ever talk to therapists.
Quite never. Factually speaking, we're the only
we're
three
the
people
only 3
who have therapists. Really interesting. I looked that up before I got here.
Wow.
But like as somebody who does that, I always struggle with, and this is going to lead into a question about it, just like not really knowing myself, and also with my anxiety and like a bit of a lack of self-confidence, not really being able to properly gauge what I am good at and what is me, and then asking people, hey, what is me? What are you good at? And they'll be like, oh, you're good at this. So I'm like, nah. Like, you don't know.
You're just being
you don't know.
nice.
So like in terms of just like, I don't know, like taking other people's word on that, like
it's hard when the thing that is your Achilles heel is what you need to overcome to be able to be good or to hear a compliment.
That's true.
But at the same time, there's something to be said for focusing on your strengths and kind of being honest with yourself, like knowing your role. To use a basketball analogy, if you're not a good shooter, then you probably shouldn't shoot, you know? So I'm not necessarily a proponent of trying to do the thing you're worst at, but you should certainly work to improve across the board. But to your question, Max, how do you receive feedback from friends? It's tricky because a relationship is not, or at least a friendship is not the same relationship as a performer to an audience. So the things that you do between the two of you, you don't necessarily do on stage. So it's not like what they say applies directly to your act, but ultimately I think you are kind of trying to capture what you are best at in a relationship and put that on stage because that's probably closest to who you are.
That's a very clear-headed approach. It's hard though in the moment when you get that you get like an insult or a compliment or feedback, constructive feedback that you didn't want or didn't expect. And to be like, this is all for the best.
Right. And again, I try to remind them, I'm not looking for affirmation here. I'm looking for you to help me see myself. More so than asking for affirmation on my sense of humor, I'm asking you to help me with self-awareness. And generally that's been helpful. And then even when friends come and see my act, not necessarily... or not the friendship itself, but they come see me do a set somewhere. Then afterwards, I ask them to give me feedback. And they always say, like, look, I'm not an expert on this, but this. And I'm like, look, comedians don't perform to experts. They perform to people. So your perspective is more helpful to me than like my fellow comedians, if I'm being completely honest.
It doesn't matter what a fellow comedian says. They're never going to pay for a ticket. They're going to ask me for a comp. And... so now everybody pull out a cocktail of your choice, unless you're driving, and unless you're in a country, listening in a country where it's legal. And we're going to play some of Mitchell's comedy, and you'll be like, wow, this guy's really, really funny. And here we go.
Please put your hands together for the very funny Mitchell Heffington.
Good evening, Gotham. How is everyone? We good? Yeah. Good. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Mitchell Heffington. I am 6'5", but I'm all legs. I recently measured, and my legs are 4 feet tall. Let me put that in perspective. If my legs were accompanied by an adult, they could ride every ride at Coney Island. Thank you.
All right, and we're back.
So we were just told that Mitchell and I, our mics were not close enough to our mouths to be able to hear properly. So we're going to start the whole show over again right now. We just want to get this right. So Ellie, can you introduce yourself?
So hi, my name is Ellie Raskin. I'm hosting your show. Our show is we do vaudeville acts, and
I remember that.
Mitchell just narrates them. So we're just gonna start now, and right now I'm putting on a top hat, and
so a man walks down the street. A man walks into a bus. Bus door opens, and the bus driver says, "You getting on?"
The end. That was improv.
And then
there it is.
And then he takes off his clothes and he starts playing the piano with his head.
And then he kills. Absolutely crushes on the bus.
And the audience loves him and makes him the president.
Anyway.
So I think you'd have a really interesting... So that set was good. You didn't bomb. I watched it. I don't remember. I watched one of your sets you'd sent me a few months ago. I remember being like, "Oh, he's really funny," because you had that joke about A minor.
Yes.
And I don't want to say the punchline without the setup because it sounds weird.
Yeah, it's out of context.
But what do you talked about bombing before? What is your? I feel like you probably are someone who has a backup plan. Like when you bomb, like what do you tell yourself? How do you cope with that?
It depends on where and how. It's contextual, but honestly, I don't really have a backup plan. If I'm bombing, I don't change anything. I just keep going with the jokes and accept the fact that I probably wasted $5 in 5 minutes.
And a beer.
And maybe a beer. Yeah. Although I don't like drinking before I get up. If there's a drink minimum, I'll buy food, I'll buy a soda, but I want to be stone cold sober so that
Do you feel like it's like it doesn't count if you do it when you're on something, or it's just your own personal preference?
No, it's a personal choice, but it's intentional. I want to be hyper aware of how people are reacting. I don't want anything about what I'm doing to be carefree is the word that came to mind. I don't think that's what I'm looking for, because I do want to be loose on stage, but I don't want to be so loose that I miss something. I don't want to miss a facial expression or a look.
I find that if I drink before a set, I feel I'm slower. I'm like not as like on it as I once was. In order for me to like hit the beats that I need to hit, I gotta just be like completely there.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like for me, I get really anxious. Like I love performing, but for some reason, the second I get on stage, my mind just starts buzzing. You know those times, not all the time. You know those times when like you do something and you finish it and you're like, I'm not really sure what I said or did.
Right.
And I hope I didn't say anything bad. And I think like one time I same thing. I try not to drink. And then one time it was like drink minimum. And I was like, oh, I'll get a beer. And it was actually helped a little. Like I was like the anxiety was lower and I was able to like read the room a little more. And obviously I don't want to create that habit.
Right.
Because I've never, ever heard a story that was like, so I started drinking at open mics and everything went well.
Right.
And now I'm Brian Regan. This doesn't happen like that.
I mean, you don't hear that anywhere. Just like I went to a job interview and I drank before a lot. It went really well.
Well, there's
I knew I didn't get the job.
There's one bit, one of the comedians on the Inside Joke said, he was like, I'm a couch salesman and I didn't want to quit. I wanted to get fired. So I was like, I'm just going to smoke weed before every day at work. But apparently I found out smoking weed makes you a really good couch salesman. You want to sit down on the couch and talk? Why, of course. So not every job, but yeah, that's not a habit you want to get into. And so on stage, it sounds like you're pretty aware, like you're analyzing the response, you're responding.
Yeah, once you get comfortable enough with your material, it's like your mouth is moving without the help of your brain, because my words I know like the back of my hand, so I'm not paying attention to the words themselves or even the delivery. I'm paying attention to reactions in the audience, so I can really sharpen up the timing or see how they look at me. So that's feedback. Right. Their physical reactions to a joke is feedback, and often their physical reactions are more objective than anything they would say or any laugh they may give. So if someone gets squeamish, I know maybe this isn't a good subject to talk about, or maybe I just haven't said something in the way I intended. And I use that as feedback. So especially at a place like a mic where there are 10 people in the room, like we've said, and they're all comedians, you're starved for feedback. You feel like you get nothing back from the audience.
It's horrible. It's made me go like weeks without doing an open mic because it's such a horrifying feeling of being like, you can boo me, but I need a reaction. Like it's so terrifying not getting anything.
I remember one of the first times I went to a mic. It was also one of the first times I went to a mic like by myself. Do you go with friends a lot or to perform? Or
no, I'm always by myself.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, for me that was terrifying, and you are a brave soul. But I went by myself, and after the show, I went to the host and I asked, "Hey, can I get any feedback on my show?" And he's just like, "Do you maybe want to take some of the lessons that we offer here?" I'm just like, "That's not feedback."
Gosh,
that's telling me that. And also, all the people that performed took lessons, and they were all really bad. So I'm not really sure how well that went, but for him. But I hear. Wait, do you just to comment on how you explain that? You say you know your words stone cold. Do you practice a lot in the mirror before you go up, or like during the week? Like,
Yeah, I pace my living room and just talk it out loud to myself.
Really?
Yeah, and
Do you have roommates?
I do have roommates. Obviously, I do this when they're not home.
Okay.
And
Just wondering.
I hold a flashlight to simulate a microphone.
Okay.
And I just talk to myself like a crazy person. And it really helps me.
That's amazing. In the moment, you may seem like a crazy person, but on stage, you seem much more natural, probably because of it.
Yeah, if you're used to talking the words instead of performing them, it sounds a little more natural.
It's true.
All right. We have 1 more minute left. Quick question. You're looking at your 10-year-old self. What do you say? With all the therapy and open mics that you've hosted and performed and everything, what do you tell them?
My 10-year-old self would have been in 3rd grade, I think. So in 3rd grade, I think the thing I was most worried about was like being different than everyone. For whatever reason, you convince yourself that fitting in is like the most important thing.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. We talked about like conforming your comedy to what you see working on stage, or just trying to have your own fresh take. So I would have told my 10-year-old self, like, be conscious of how you may be trying to conform to what everyone else is doing, and give yourself the freedom to be yourself.
Yeah. Well, Mitchell, thank you for that. Thank you for being our first guest, not for hosting us.
First ghost.
Where'd he go?
Honestly, it has been a joy, and I am so honored that you've been here with us today.